Goffs was established on March 19, 1883 at the, quote, top of the hill, 30 miles west of Needles on the newly constructed South Pacific Railroad. It was originally called Blake after the founder Isaac Blake, but later was renamed Goffs by the railroad company in 1902. In 1890 it became a permanent town, and by 1892 it was a railroad shipping point for the mining district of Vanderbilt. Everything that you see here, including the front gate, was donated by many people in the surrounding area and was actually in use and production at one point in time. As you pass the front gate, the most prominent structure you'll see is the schoolhouse on the right, which was built in 1914. Vandals had almost completely destroyed it by the early 80s, but luckily it was restored in 1998 to what you see now. And in 2001 it was put on the National Register of Historic Places and is open to the general public. Most of the things you see on the outside of the building and the fence itself is original. First thing you'll notice when you walk into the old schoolhouse is photographs on the walls of the actual people who lived in Goffs during its time of occupancy. A lot of the things that you see here are now in the museum or back in the museum's yard. Most of the buildings, though, from the old town, except for the schoolhouse, are no longer there. But a lot of the memories and the equipment is left behind.
My name is Laura Messiah, and I'm the Director of Museum Operations and Public Outreach.
Now, if they want to make a donation, what do they do?
They can come, well, they can do it online on our website, or they can come here and visit and leave a donation. They can become a member, but only $35 a year.
Oh, nice.
And you get to camp here overnight as a member. So you can bring your tent, you can bring your RV, you spend the night, you can use this as a stepping stone to go explore the East Mojave Desert.
There's a donation jar, so when you come out here, you better put some money in it. What are you doing? You silly boy. Now, if you guys want books about this place, they got every book you can imagine in this little bookstore off to the corner. Amazing stuff. Books I've never even seen. And of course, every time you make a purchase, it helps the foundation here keep this place alive. Oh, imagine playing on this in summertime. Oh, you grab that, burn your little fingers. And there's the rings right there that I was just showing you. Isn't that cool? It looks like fun. Not in the summertime because those things are super hot. Those are called maypoles, and originally there were two of them on the north and south end of the building. When the school was operating, the maypoles were moved when a new school was opened in Essex. The one on the south is the one of the originals that were obtained through the courtesy of Mary Howard. The maypole in the north yard was originally from the elementary school in Nelson, Nevada, which was obtained in 1998 through the courtesy of Gail and Donna Andrus. The flagpole in the front of the schoolhouse, standing in the same spot as the original, was acquired from an elementary school in Los Angeles, and it was donated by Tierra del Sol 4-Wheel Drive Club of San Diego. This is cool. They got a little barbecue place here.
Yeah, and look. It's like
nice. Look at these old stoves in here.
Nice, huh?
Heck yeah. How many of you guys remember these things? Maytag. That's right. It's a wash machine. The Landfair sign that you just saw on the right used some of the original materials that once made up the original Landfair sign for the California Eastern Railroad, which was 16 miles north of this particular location. The original sign was over at Metzger's residence in Needles for many years. His father, Dick Metzger, was the original engineer on the railroad that ran out of Goffs to Barnwell, Ivanpah, and Searchlight by way of Landfair. The sign was restored and put here in the museum. Everything you see on the left and right has a very personal story and a tremendous amount of history behind it, and we'll do our best to give you all the information about each and every item, including this beautifully restored replica of the original train depot that served Goff for the mining towns of Vanderbilt, Manuel, and Searchlight. Now, originally Goffs used to be called Blake, and in 1902 they changed it over to Goffs. Now, the reason why it's called Goffs is because if you know anything about railroad towns, they always try to put them in alphabetical order. Towns like Amboy and Bristol and Cadiz, you had Essex, Ferner, and then of course Goffs. Wow, look at this old Packard right here, you see that? Now, the funny story behind this 1948 Packard is that a dirt poor prospector who lived at Cadiz somehow managed to purchase this lovely Packard brand new. He told Maurice Swain, who bought the car from him in 1963, that he lived on dog food so he could afford the monthly payments until he had the vehicle paid off. This is part of a whim, if you know what that is. And of course, this is a homemade hoist. There's the kibble. You see how this is set up? You see the trunnions on the side. But this shiv wheel doesn't belong here. That shiv wheel goes to a full-size head frame, so. Now the original story is that this huge shiv wheel was originally on the main head frame of the Bighorn Mine in the Hidden Valley Mining District in southern part of the province mountain. Many years ago, someone pulled the head frame down. Attempts to try to retrieve the shiv wheel. The only problem is the shiv wheel got away from him, rolled down a very steep canyon. So with the permission from BLM, the Riverside Rough Riders 4-wheel drive club retrieved the wheel and brought it to Goffs to be put on display. Looks kind of comical the way they've got this set up. These are hand winches, should be obvious. I need one of these at my mine. And of course that's the toilet. Now Richard Meyer built this as a joke, but he did get the idea from the portable toilets, or honeypots as we call them, that are built on ore car frames, lowered into the mines so that the miners have somewhere to go. Now, this outhouse you see in the background, a classic wooden outhouse, but it originally came from the Baghdad Chase mines located south of Ludlow. It never really had a door on it. In fact, it faced away from the crowds in a direction to provide the thoughtful miner with a pleasant view. Now, right behind this is a water tank. This water tank and tower were used at a private residence in Goffs for many years. They were donated by Walter Bennett in 1994 and reassembled here by Bill Fullerton. Look at these big old crucibles right here. See that? They would pour into there. One guy on this side, one guy on this side, and then they could pour the molten precious metals, slag, everything else that's accompanied with it. This is a little chipmunk. They use this in assay labs a lot. Put it in here, it crushes out, comes out the bottom. These are fantastic little crushers if you want to have one at home to do your own processing on a small scale. They use them in the gold industry as part of the assaying process because you had to crush it down to assay it, 29 grams. And then you run it through a crucible, you fire it, and then you compel it, and that'll tell you your grade on your gold ore. This isn't very common. It's a 2-stamp mill, and you can see it still has the bowl wheel on there. Now the bowl wheels were made out of wood because they tried cast iron, and the vibration on the cam would shatter the cast iron. Now this 2-stamp ore mill, rare for its place of manufacture in Reno, spent its life above the 8,000 foot level on Mount Grant, southwest of Yerington, Nevada. The neat thing about this one is it was made in Nevada Iron Works or Engineering Works. See that? And these little guys right here, those are the dies and those are the shoes. See that? And the ore comes in from the back, and there's always a screen here. That's what these are for right here. The screen would lock into place, and the ore couldn't come out of there until it was pounded to a pulp and then run over copper plates that had mercury on them. Like you saw in one of my other videos, the reason why they use mercury is because the gold, when it's freshly crushed, it's fresh, it'll stick to that gold. So you put the mercury on the copper plates, and it'll stick to the copper plates, and then when the gold flows over it, the gold will stick to the mercury. And then at the end of the shift, they take like a little squeegee and they squeegee off all the mercury, which is an amalgam. They press out all the additional mercury, and then they run it through a retort to get sponge. Here's a gyrator, a Gibson gyrator. This would take the place of a stamp mill. They use gyrators today. They're called cone mills. Material flows down. This thing gyrates around. You can see where it's offset up there. As it goes around, it'll crush that ore as it comes in contact with the two cones that are offset from each other. And then it'll flow down here. You can see where they actually run this thing. And they got a carpet in there to check it. But you can see that it's not ground down very well. Now, this rare gyrator crusher spent its useful life at the Elephant Eagle mine south of Mojave. It was donated to the museum by the Golden Queen Mining Company. It was dismantled, moved to Goffs, and erected by Bill Fullerton and a crew of volunteers in 1999. Then in 2017, Charlie Connell and a crew of 10 volunteers got the crusher back in operation over the course of a year. These are rare. I don't see these a lot out in the field. Mostly they use stamp mills. Now with this aerial shot, you have a clear view of all the things that we've seen. There's the train depot on the bottom left-hand corner. Now as we approach the very north end of the park, you're going to see some fantastic stamp mills that have been painstakingly dismantled and reconstructed on site, and they also are fully functional. So you had a railroad depot or a spur coming off of here going up to the mines in Vanderbilt, up into those hills to my north. So originally it was a railroad town for all the ore that was coming up out of the mountains. And so what they did is they rebuilt this, which is an exact replica of the station here at Goffs. This replica of the actual Goffs Depot, which stood on the east side of the Goffs Railroad crossing from 1902 to 1956, is the Dennis Caspier Library. It was built in 2008 to house the archive material that documents and preserves the history of the Eastern Mojave Desert. This research center contains resources found nowhere else in the world. And of course, because of so many workers had children here on the railroad, they had to build a schoolhouse. And they had 29 students. And the schoolhouse was in operation for about 26 years. Not bad. Now, another thing that people don't know is that the schoolhouse was also hosted for social events and for dances. And this is before the military came in later. Wow, look at the size of that windmill. This windmill dates to 1912 in Lanphier. It's a 20-foot Samson, which is the largest ever made. There's a historic photo in the schoolhouse entryway of this windmill at its original site, and Charlie Connell supervised the reassembly of the windmill in 2019. It's the Charlie Connell Mining District, home of the Without Fear Millmen. Yeah! Charlie Connell! We got a lot of nice exhibits out here. If you haven't been out here, you need to come out here. It's really cool. And like I said, a lot of this is operational. Now, there's an interesting story about the two stamp mill that you see behind me. The two stamp mills stood in Round Valley, about 20 miles northwest of Goffs, on land that was homesteaded by Ambrose Frank Stott in 1931. Now, Stotts was a lifelong miner and on occasion lived in the East Mojave from the early 20s up to the late 50s. This is the last complete stamp mill from the East Mojave Desert. The mill was purchased from the landowner Bud Smith III in 1999, and volunteers and family members disassembled and brought it to Goffs, and the reconstruction of it later continued in 2003, and of course, under the direction of Charlie Connell, which you're going to hear a lot here, helped reassemble the entire structure. And then on certain occasions, they'll actually run it. They'll put gold in there and show you how it operates. Now, keep in mind, they're not going to have copper plates with mercury on it, like I told you earlier, because there's a big stigma out there about mercury. But actuality, it's safe and it won't harm you as long as you know what you're doing with it. Now, a lot of people are probably wondering, Jeff, what was the downfall of Goffs? Why did they abandon it, so to speak? Well, 1913 to 1926, you remember, it was the National Old Trails Road out here that went all the way to California. That's how people got to California. That one went right by Goffs, and that's how basically everybody got out here to Goffs. Then in 1926, it was designated what? What was it designated, sweetie? It was designated Route 66. There it is, Route 66. This is the original Route 66. Beautiful stamp mill. These two 5-stamp batteries were originally part of a 60-stamp mill erected in 1887 at the Empire Mine, about 20 miles northwest of Helena, Montana. The mill would have ended up in France. However, her partner asked more for the mill than the Disneyland purchaser was willing to pay, and so it sat at the Pauley Brothers scrapyard until it was purchased by Dennis Cassiver in 1996. Moving the mill and other mining equipment to Goffs was a major undertaking. Mining and other historic equipment that was acquired from Joe Pauley can be found throughout the Goffs Museum grounds. Restoration of the mill began in October 2010 under the direction of, you guessed it, Charlie Connell. It was completed 3 years later in September of 2013 after an estimated 5,460 hours of volunteer labor. Route 66, which is over here in the background, operated from 1926 to 1931. And a lot of people came out here, like I said, about 5,000 to 6,000 people every single year would come out here. Well, the California Transportation Board decided, you know what, we could save a bunch of money, about $240,000 a year, if we reroute Route 66 and run it all the way straight and bypass this area. And that's what they did. Beautiful shaft sinking bucket. This head frame was erected by Bill Fullerton with the help of volunteers in 2001 to represent the many mining head frames that once dotted the East Mojave. The mine is called the Big Hunch, Goffs Extension, after a mine in the New York mountains owned by the Brook family, formerly of Goffs. So from 1931 onward, they rerouted Route 66. And of course, because there's nobody traveling out here, not very many like there was, that killed Goffs. And that was basically what started the downturn. Oh, there's an old whiptail of Goffs itself. Here's a whiptail. Haven't seen one of those in a while. Where are you? There you are. There he goes. He's not liking me too much, huh? These are called skip buckets. This looks like 1 ton. There's a little baby homemade one. These 2 round ore buckets, or skip buckets that you see on the left, were commonly used in small mines to hoist ore up the shaft. The large square skip on the right was also used to hoist ore. Ore was conveyed in one compartment, while workers would have been conveyed in the other compartment. And this is what they used in the larger operational mines that used what was called a Kimberley to dump. It was an automatic dumping mechanism, so when it got to the top of the head frame, it would automatically dump. These, of course, use the trunnions. These are called trunnions on the side so that it could dump. This is kind of like what we have in our mine. This is a beautiful shaft sinking bucket. It's got the trunnions on the side for dumping. It's also got this on the bottom. Usually they have a chain or a hook. The reason why is if you didn't have the trunnions, the dumping mechanism is usually a little hook or a chain hanging down, and as it would come up the shaft, it would go back down, hook on it, dump, come up, the platform would lift and it would go back down. And here's the hoisting house, and if I'm not mistaken, there is a beautiful looking winch in there. Look at this. Beautiful looking equipment in here. Now this hoist house has a bunch of John Deere engines and hoist in it. The engine and the hoist are functional thanks to volunteer John Alstad. It was originally used at the Orofino mine in the Old Dad Mountains and was donated in 1992 by Pat Graves. You got some hit and miss engines over here, hit and miss. You got some jaw crushers. Here's another jaw. That is a beautiful looking winch. This is about the size that we need for our mine. So if you know of anybody out there that's got one of these that wants to sell it, I'm in the neighborhood to pick one up. That's the clutch, so you can go forward or reverse. And then over here you've got the brake. So like I said, if you know anybody that's got one, I'm in the market to buy one. This tree is loaded with birds. Hi guys, beautiful looking birds. Now directly to the west of the schoolhouse, you can have these self-guided walking tours out across this vast area where they have incredible relics scattered throughout from all different areas around the Goffs location. Now you could spend an entire day out there and not see it all. Hey, let's see if we can hop aboard and ride like a hobo. Remember that? Still going. Holy cow, that's a long train. Now you can see the original Santa Fe Railroad as it passes directly to the south of Goffs. Some of these trains are well over a mile in length and they run in both directions daily. Now you've heard me talk about skip buckets. It's a bucket with the trunnion, that's the one we have in our drift mine. I'm gonna show you what a skip car looks like. There's a difference. That is a skip car. Now most of the time the rear wheels are offset so it can dump. That is a traditional skip car. This skip car is similar to the skip car I just showed you that's being used for the American Boy stamp mill. Now many years ago it was recovered from a mine in the Old Woman Mountains and it was donated by Mary Blythe Smith, formerly of Essex in '94. You see how the rear wheels here are wider than the front wheels. The reason why is because this is part of the dumping mechanism. You got a second rail towards the top of the head frame, and as this thing goes up, the front rails dip down, so the front of this skip dips down. This rides the second set of rails, it continues to go up. And in essence, it tilts this thing all the way vertical. And everything dumps out, they turn around, they release it, and it goes back down, the front comes up, goes back down the shaft. But this one looks like it was somewhat homemade, and you can see some ore in it. What they'd do, they'd hoist this all the way to the top, and they would dump it into the top, and it would run into the back, and that way the stamp mill could crush it. Now, before it gets to that, you got to run it in this thing, which is called a jaw crusher. And this is the ore that they're running in there. It's not bad. I wonder what the grade is, maybe 1/2 ounce per ton. But here's the jaw that they'd be running. Now, this is a Q-Kin crusher, And the crusher was built during the 1940s, and it has a very unique and unusual design because both the front and rear jaws move in opposition. The crusher has no flywheels and rotates at 356 RPM, which is much faster than a 220 RPM on a regular crusher. The additional speed makes up for the missing flywheel, which makes the crusher lighter. It was donated in 1999 from the Death Valley mine by Dave Given. So it would crush it down to about half inch minus, and then from there, this is a mock-up. They would run it up to the top. This is the engine they're using to power this thing. There's the jack shafts. The ore would come down through this hopper, and then this plate right here would move every time the cam would move up on top. This would rotate about 2 inches. So it's slowly doing this and kicking the ore down this chute into the back of this mortar box here. Then you have the stamps here, which weigh about at least 1,000 pounds a piece. They're going up and down. You got the shoes on the end, the dies inside. The ore comes in the back. It sits in there and gets crushed. And when it's finally big enough, which is enough to pass through this screen, it comes out over this. Now you can change the size of your screen to any mesh you want. Now, like I said, in the old days, they'd have copper plates there, and the copper would be smeared with mercury. The mercury would stick to the copper. And as the freshly crushed ore, which had the gold in it, free mill preferably, it would actually stick to that mercury, which is on the copper plates. That's the larger pieces. Now the smaller pieces, if they didn't stick, they would flow over the top, and there's usually a small trough here that would feed to a shaker table. So then they would shaker it to get the finer material. And then after that, then they would run it through a cyanide process. This way they have a circuit set up for each size of gold, because cyanide doesn't work on large gold. Shaker tables are designed for small gold. And of course, anything coming out of that 1/4 inch screen that's pure gold is gonna easily stick to that mercury. So they've got their bases covered by having a 3-step process. And that's what I recommend for a lot of the larger scale mines out there, is to do it that way. Now, of course, I understand that small scale miners can't do that because it's too dangerous. And of course, you got issues with the EPA and all these other 3-letter groups. But what I recommend, if you're crushing your own ore out there to liberate the free mill gold, is you have to have a crushing circuit. You can't just expect one device to crush your ore down and you'll be done. It has to go through a series of circuits. All right, look at the size of this cam. You can see my hand? Now the cam would push up and down on these. These would actually be affixed to those rods. And then on the bottom of the rod would be a shoe. These are the couplers that hold the shoe and the rod together. These are the shoes that are on the bottom of the coupler, and they're only held in place with these wooden shims. So up there, you see those cams? This is how big those cams are. They're extremely heavy. Those cams move these up and down, which moves the rod up and down. So the ore is sitting here, comes in, the shoe is literally pounding it with 1,500 pounds of force. That's a lot of weight. This is a good example of a batch mill, and I've seen these run a lot in artisanal mines in South America and Africa. You have this small opening here and a plate that goes over it. You charge it with a load of ore, and you can also put your balls in there too. Run it around for a couple hours, turn it upside down. You have a mesh here to catch the balls, and then all your powdered ore, which is mixed with water, comes out the bottom. Then you'd run that across a shaker table. You see how you have to go in steps. These are the scoops I was telling you about that they use on the ball mills. What it does is it systematically brings in just enough material not to overload it. And like I said earlier, the very first step of the process is a jaw crusher. You have to have one of these. Now, I told you earlier that you have to go in certain steps to crush your ore down to get it to a very fine particle. I like anywhere from 80 to 200 mesh for your load gold. But you can use what's called a roller mill. And the RC46, which is put out by Keen Industries, Pat Keen makes it, it has it in combination with a 4x6 jaw. Perfect for you small scalers out there who just want to run your material right there on the spot without having a complete crushing circuit. Anyway, this is a 2-stamp mill. Here's the feeding mechanism that slowly feeds the back of this mortar box. You don't want to overfeed it because you'll clog it up. So this thing actually runs off the cam. You can see it up there. Every time that little horseshoe goes up and down off of one of the stamps, it actually advances this wheel forward. It sits at a pitched angle, which can be adjusted, and the ore, which is right here, can come out and feed into the back of this slot in the back of the mortar box. On the front, you have the screen here, and see the material? It's trying to come out. It's not small enough yet, but if it stays inside of there long enough, it'll get crushed down to this mesh. And you can see they got a 1/4 inch, and then they've got -20 behind it. I like running -20 to help liberate that gold at least. Nothing larger than -20. -50 to 80 is perfect. But this is a little 2-stamp mill, and you can see they have this set up for demonstrations right here. Comes across this makeshift sluice box that has this outdoor carpet on it to catch the gold. Then the material comes out here, the lighter material or the waste material, and then they just pump it out. But in real operations, this would be a copper sheet here, and they would have mercury spread across it, and the gold, the larger pieces of gold would stick to that. This would flow over, this would go right to a shaker table, and then after the shaker table, that would go to a cyanide tank.
Now, I know there was a lot of things I left out, but I wanted to cover as much as I possibly could without making the video too long. Now, if you enjoyed today's video, I would appreciate it if you smash that like button. And of course, if you're not subscribed to our channel, consider subscribing now, as it helps our channel grow. And if you're ever in the Needles area, I highly recommend that you take a trip over to Goffs, which is off of the old Route 66, which parallels Route 40. I guarantee you're going to enjoy it, and it'll be time well spent. Tell them that we sent you, and make sure you make a donation. I'll see you on the next video.